note, I'm just going to start and introduce Dr. Ray. We're running a little early, which is always good. And I think that's because I'd like Dr. Ray to talk as long as he wants, because I'm just absolutely thrilled. I'm actually going to read this because it's so much and it's so important. You can stand there, sir. Dr. Ray is a thoracic and cardiovascular surgeon with a strong passion for the environmental aspects of health and disease. Founder of the Environmental Health Center in Dallas, Texas, Dr. Ray is currently the director of this highly specialized medical facility. The center also has a clinic in Chicago. In '88, Dr. Ray was named the world's first professional chair of environmental medicine at the Robbins Institute of Toxicology at University of Surrey in Guildford, England. He was awarded the Jonathan Foreman Gold Medal Award in '87 and the Herbert J. Wrinkle Award in '93, both by the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, as well as named the Outstanding Alumnus by Otterbein College in '91. He's also been named the Mountain Valley Water Hall of Fame for work in the field of study of clean water, and in '95 he received the Fame Award for pioneering work in the environmental and preventative medicine. In '97 he was named the International Man of the Year. That's not a small feat. And in 2002 received the O. Spurgeon English Humanitarian Award from Temple University. He has authored a ton of books, and the one you need to write down right now is The Optimum Environments for Optimum Health and Creativity. I'll repeat that because you need to write it down. The Optimum Environments for Optimum Health and Creativity. And also co-author of Your Home, Your Health and Well-Being. I have 2 copies of that book with David Russo. with David Russo from Vancouver. Really honestly, Dr. Ray is not a pioneer in environmental medicine. He is the pioneer. He really is. And I've had the pleasure of being able to say that I've worked with clients of mine who have been through Dr. Ray's, and I can honestly say from a personal perspective that I've dealt with people who are very severely multiple chemical sensitive. And these people were, you know, the light was going out. And when they came back, the light was there. The light was there, and I'd never seen anything like it. I'm honored that you're here. Thank you.
I hope if you can't hear me, let me know. I'm rather adverse to electricity, so I can screw up a lot of microphones and everything. Of course, I got into this in sort of a nebulous way in that, you know, the body runs on electricity. And the only difference between a dead cell and a live cell is electrical charge. So if we can make it sort of simple, and being a surgeon, I've got to make it simple because I'm not too bright and I can only remember 3 things, you know. And so if you just remember that, we're all influenced by that, and we're also antennas, and because of that. And so we hear all this talk about what somebody can tolerate and what somebody can't, and we never know because it's individual. And so I have a little story that one day, you know, I've shocked many hearts, just held them in my hand and shocked them, and they start going. It's a real miracle of how that electricity goes. And so we can use it for good or bad, you know. We use it in medicine for electroencephalograms, we use it for electrocardiograms, we use it for electromyograms, and so on down the line. But we also know it can be very harmful at this stage. I'll never forget when I got into this early in the game, some guy called from Parkland Hospital, and you know that's the famous trauma center in the world. And he said, "Doc," he said, "you resuscitated me once, and I got well, and then I went out and had a motorcycle accident, and they want to cut off my leg." Well, I said, you know, if you're going to, you're at Parkland Hospital, they know when the hell a leg needs to come off and when it doesn't, because they do everything they can, known to man and some not known to man, to save that thing. He said, "I don't care." He says, "I want your opinion." So he comes over to my hospital, and here's a guy with an eggshell of a leg. It looked like an egg had been cracked, all the bones. There weren't just one break, but it was egg all the way down to his toes. And there was pus running out of at least 20 different places. And he'd had all the antibiotics and all the potions that anybody could ever think of in that medical center. And I thought, what the heck am I going to do with this guy? So I thought, well, I've heard electricity is a great healing thing. This was back when there were no electrical gadgets for human use other than recordings. So I called up the commissar in Washington and said, I need permission to get one of these electrical stimulators and try it on this guy's leg, because it hadn't been approved by the FDA or approved by anybody up there. So they said, yeah, you can use that in that condition. So I lined that guy's legs with electrode, and he walked out in a month with a minor limp. And I thought, boy, that blew my mind. I've seen it resuscitate a heart. Now I've seen it heal wounds that are, unintentable, untraceable. So that's how I got my first burst into electricity in the body. And ever since then, we've been in trouble because of that. Now, there's certainly the electrical sensitivity is a problem that has really come on in the last few years. And, there's a couple great books you ought to get. One's by Becker. I think it's Electromagnetic Man, and the other one's by Cyril Smith, which is Electric Man. And those are good things to realize about. Now, what is electrical sensitivity? And it certainly is intolerance to electricity in many forms. It can be transformers in or outside the house. It can be intolerance to computers. We have a lot of people who can't tolerate computers, and you can have, for the wireless now is the big thing, of course, and as we heard yesterday, all those things. Electrical outlets, electrical wiring, TVs, Wi-Fi's, the sun. We have some people who are sun sensitive because of the electromagnetic waves in the sun. And then we have other people who are color sensitive. I have one guy who couldn't look at yellow. For example, if he saw that yellow coat over there, he'd collapse. And I mean, just bang, like that. And I said, what are we going to do with this guy, And so we finally worked him out. And he now travels all over the world and does very well. So, there are all kinds of different electromagnetic problems. And so when you come and you have people come and tell you they got that problem, you believe them, boy, and then you've got to work around it to figure out what the heck to do for that individual thing. Now, the electromagnetic sensitivity can occur de novo. However, about 80 to 90% of it is preceded by the chemical sensitivity problem or chemical overload. And a lot of times, if you go ahead and treat the chemical problem, and that means you've got to treat their food sensitivity, their mold sensitivity, and their chemical problem, and of course the most powerful tool is the house for that, well then a lot of these people's electrical problem will go away completely just with doing that. But then there's another group where no matter what you do on that, they've got to have other extraordinary measures to do that. And I've reflected on this most of my life now, and I've decided what we've tried to do is reinvent the cave. And so we go back to treatment of about 10,000 years or something like that, So, well, of course, when we first started talking about electrical sensitivity and chemical sensitivity, of course, we had a little bit of resistance. And what I'd say is that most of my colleagues thought I was crazy. And so what we decided to do is do a study on electric sensitivity. And what we did is we got a double screen room. You couldn't pick up the telephone in there. You couldn't call out. It was screened with steel, and then it was screened with copper. And I've realized that the copper and all that kind of stuff has to be really, quote, very small weave so that the films can't go through it. You guys know that better than I do. And then we started doing studies. And so where's the puncher here? I don't have one. I don't have one up here. He's a live puncher. Well, I'm about half in my talk now, and so let's go on. Okay. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, go on. Okay, keep going. Keep going. Okay, next slide. What we did is, next one, we had a study where we took 100 people who complained of being electrically sensitive. And of course, at that time, which was about 20 years ago, you had a lot of problems. Wait a minute, you're going too fast now.
Say when.
All right. We tried to screen the room as best we could, and we tried to screen the clinic as best we could at that time. So you can go to the next slide now. And we did have, like for example, we found that the TVs, if you could get them at least 8 feet from the individual, and have them up about 6 to 8 feet, and then have them encased in different metals, it would work very well, and you couldn't measure with the measuring devices at that time. You couldn't measure much. They fell off at about that time, and so that's what we did. Now, if we can go on to the next slide. Same with the computers, and what we learned was if you get the computers with a whole long cord on them and get patients way back from this, why then a lot of them can tolerate it, and if you shield it also. Now, that sometimes I think you have to have a little magnification for some people because of that. Okay, if we go on now, please. So anyway, we tried to ensure that there was not much extraneous things as we could do at that time. And of course, we were totally unfamiliar with materials, so we only use materials for chemical problems. And I'll show you later what we've learned to change these things, okay? All right, next one then. So on the first phase, what we did is we took 100 patients who complained of sensitivity. And we had them in this cage room. We'd sort of depollute them chemically, and then we'd sit them in there after a period of time so their pollutant load was down, and you could magnify your sensitivity so you could prove cause and effect. And then we use a frequency generator, just a standard frequency generator, which went from 1/10 to 5 megahertz in frequency. And then we challenged them off for about 5 minutes and then off for 10 minutes. And we used some blanks and placebos in there. And so what we found was that a lot of these people certainly did react to electricity. If you go on the next slide now. We got it down to where there were 25 of them that did not react to the blanks. One of the problems with the electrical problem is that when you trigger somebody off, they just keep going on and on and on, you know? And so so we had to choose the patients that didn't react to the blanks at all to prove that this thing existed. And so we had about 25 of those. Now you can go on to the next slide. And we had the third phase where we did 25 healthy volunteers who had no symptoms that they could discern from electricity, and we challenged them. And if you can go on with that, they didn't react to any frequency, and they didn't react to any placebos. So they were a good group to compare these other sensitive people to. So if we can go to the next slide now. What we found was about 70% of the EMF sensitive patients had positive signs and symptoms scores, plus a change in the autonomic nervous system. All the electrically sensitive people had changes in their signs and symptoms, but at that time we didn't have enough tools to measure the body's response. But we did find the pupillography, which if I think you go to the next slide, I'll just show you that, where you could actually measure the pupil response, and there's a whole litany of about 10 steps that you can do to prove that. So we did find that, and if you go on to the next slide, we had the fourth phase where we re-challenged, where the patients had already not reacted to placebo, but reacted to the active frequencies, and then we did them again, just to be sure, because you have to remember that the criticism at that time was rather vigorous, as you can bet. And so what we found was that there was clearly electrical sensitivity without any question, and that these patients had problems, and what they said was true. Next slide. So I always say you always listen to the chemically sensitive patient, listen to the electrical patient. They will tell you they're the best meter in the world. Now the one problem is that the meter can get confused at times, and so therefore you have to have other better meters also that are true, but as you well know, every one of them got a flaw, you know. So let's go on to the next slide now. So in conclusions were that electromagnetic sensitivity exists, and that it's a prime promoter of disease. And if you think about it, since the body works on electricity, it's probably the final thing for health that if we don't pay attention to, we're going to have problems. And you guys have got the goods in your hand to build good environments to do that. Now, we started off, next slide please. So since then we've had 1,500, probably now 3,000 patients that are electrically sensitive in all degrees. Now the question is, what are the other things that can trigger it? And there seems to be a high correlation between that and chemical and metal sensitivity, particularly zinc, copper, chrome, cobalt, next one, stainless steel, titanium, and its alloys, including molybdenum, manganese, magnesium sensitivity. And we've done probably over 500 patients now where we actually, every patient who's electrically sensitive, we test them for the metals. And of course, what we find is that a lot of them are sensitive to one metal or so on, and you've got to neutralize it with the injection treatment, and then you've got to avoid it for a while for the people to go down, get their sensitivity down. Now, the other thing we found is now 220 different implants that can be put in the human. And so, you know, we're becoming bionic. I have one guy that's got 5 different implants on him. And you don't think he might be sensitive a little bit to electricity? Now, the most common implant are dental fillings. And then we've got artificial jaws, metal jaws. We've got artificial hearts, valves, metal valves. We've got artificial shoulders, artificial plates. We got plates and screws every place, you know, wires, you name it. And then we've got the other synthetics like the Teflon, Dacron, and so on. These will all contribute to your electrical sensitivity. And if you don't get them neutralized, you may well have problems, even though you've designed your building and designed your house so, you know, to be as free of electrical problems as possible. They do act as antennas. I'll never forget, I had one girl came in and she had a heart block and she needed a pacemaker. Well, a pacemaker was put in, and within 48 hours, every joint in the body was full of pain, and she was swollen in every joint, couldn't walk, couldn't move hardly. Well, you know, all the internists and everybody, they gave all the poisons and everything, didn't work. And I thought, you know, it must be, maybe she's sensitive to that pacemaker. So we got all the MSD sheets, which aren't very accurate, but about the best you can do, and tested all the metals that was in there. And then the synthetic that was in there turned off her reaction just like that instantaneously. She went 2 years with no medication and with the pacemaker working properly, and then the dang pacemaker failed, which is usually unusual at this day and age. They used to all fail at 2 years, but now it's, you know, 5, 10 years that they'll work. So she had to get another one put in, and by gosh, the same thing happened. And so we got that, and she's now 5 years. We've turned off that sensitivity and that electrical impulses, and she's fine. Her pacemakers work well, and it saved her life. So those are the kind of things that we're seeing that really cinches the fact how important electricity is in the body and how we can all become antennas. I had another girl who had a jaw, 25. She was had an auto accident. They had to put an artificial jaw on her, a metal jaw. And it was titanium and titanium alloy. And the titanium alloy has a bunch of different metals in it besides titanium. So I tested her for titanium, which is the main ingredient, nothing. Tested her for nickel, which is the highest they sensitize, nothing. Went down the line, and I tested her for molybdenum, and I provoked all her symptoms. We gave her the injections of the neutralizing dose of molybdenum. Within 6 weeks, she was without symptoms. Now, this is a girl who'd been on morphine every 3 hours for the last several months, okay? And she's been 5 years now without any injections or anything, and her jaw's fine, and she's fine. So this is how significant the problem can be, and how aberrant electricity can screw up these patients and magnetism and cause problems. So you go on now. You got me off on a sidetrack here. Okay, now, the other thing, it's 80% of these people initiators is pesticide. And so the number 1 and 2 polluters in the homes are natural gas and pesticide. They're tied. And this will initiate the electromagnetic sensitivity all the time, okay? So you want to be sure that those houses have no pesticides in them. And sometimes it's very difficult to tell because of the inert ingredient law, which now says you can have DDT in there as long as it's not an active ingredient. And so, and DDT has a half-life of 150 years, so you know you got that to contend with. Next slide, please. Okay. Most of these people have food problems, about 80% of them, because it messes up the food handling mechanism in the brain. There are 4 areas in the brain that handle food, and so they'll be food sensitive a lot of times. And a lot of these things will melt away when you get a proper living quarters for them. That's the neat thing about it, okay? But we do now have blood work, and we do have hair analysis, blood, urine analysis, and we actually now have breath analysis where you can measure 600 chemicals, which is a new technology that's just come on, and it really does help us all on what you want to have in your environment at home, you see. And we do now have kits that you can send, and if you want to evaluate an indoor environment or an outdoor environment, you can draw the air up into these kits, and we've got a good analyzing guy, chemist, who does this. And it's no affiliation with me or anything. We just use him as a technology. So that's the other thing. Okay, next slide, please. This is just an example. I don't have a pointer here, but you can see with the blood analysis, benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, xylene, hexane, which will rattle your brain like mad. And some of these act as anesthetics, like cyclopropane is an anesthetic, and yet you have it all. That'll mess up the electrical components of the body. Okay, if we can go on now. And here's an example of a breath analysis with cyclopropane being number 1 in that patient. Now, where in the heck did she get it, and how are you going to prevent it in your safe environment, you know? Because you've got to do that, otherwise, you know, she's going to be in trouble the whole time. We have a nice new fracking gas field between Dallas and Fort Worth, and that's the big rage right now. You know, we're going to frack our gas into use. And what we found with the breath analysis on these people, we found it in the outside air, we found it on the inside air, and we found it in the breath analysis. And what we see is, like, for example, fracking has used the hydrochloric acid to frack the rocks and everything. We found 2 patients with hydrochloric acid in them. And we found just whatever was in that gas outside was there, the butanes, the propanes, the methanes, and so on. So you are just to the mercy of your environment, okay? And you've got to look at that to do it. I mean, this is a virtual chemistry. I don't know what half these things are. And these are the top 14, okay? The top 20. And, you know, it's taken us a year with a master chemist working full-time to get computer runouts. So where are you going to find cyclopropane? Where do you find isobutane? Where do you find nonane and so on? Which is neat now, because now that we've got that pretty well done, we can say to a patient, okay, now look, are you around A, B, C, D, or find out where that A, B, C, D is coming from. And this will be a tool, I think, for you guys eventually, that we can do it. And now that we've got the outside, inside air And the neat thing about this is a 350 bucks is all it costs. And some of the air analysis kits for air are the same or cheaper, you know. So if you guys want those, I can't remember the dang 800 number, but there's a girl that sends the kits out, and she can get them for you, you know. Just call the Environmental Health Center Dallas or email it or whatever, and they'll do that for you. It's been a great tool for us, these tools. Okay, next slide. So we certainly know that EMF sensitivity exists, and you need to find the cause if you can. And you know, in the house, electric beds can be a problem. Heating pads can be a problem. Microwave ovens, you know, so on down the line. Okay, next slide. All right, now some of the techniques available beside the history, go ahead, we just talked about. So now I'm going to go what we can do about the treatment of electromagnetic sensitivity. And a lot of this depends on you guys, because you got to get your homes right. We know now from controlled environments, we've made controlled environments now for 30 years, and we're starting to see all the things. And some of it is just the opposite of what we do for the chemical problem, which of course drives us crazy. Okay, next slide, please. All right, we want to try to get areas away from electrical sources in the United States. Is that possible?